Welcome to Inspire London.
It's been a very thought-provoking session. I think the stories are so powerful.
I really like the fact that people share stories first.
So that was awesome. I really like how it all fit together.
Magic stuff can happen when you get really like-minded people in the room.
Articulating your why diversity and inclusion is important to you and your team and setting goals, you can really invite everyone to the table.
We had lost all of our diversity, all of our inclusion, everything that was part of that organisation.
It's not even talk to me about Black Lives Matter, but just ask how are you?
I've personally been made aware of things I just couldn't see.
Hello and welcome to our Inspire community who are joining us probably from all over the globe. So good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to today's Learning and Inspiration online with us. I'm Ruth Danson. I'm from the Inspiring Workplaces team, as you probably guessed. And that video that we just showed you, that was last week where we finally got to meet in person for our first Inspire City event. That was held in London. And today we're meeting here virtually to hear about how we can stop wasting our money on well-being. Employee wellness and well-being is fundamental, as I'm sure everyone who's watching, either live or on demand, will agree. It's absolutely fundamental for maintaining an inspiring workplace. But what does supporting the well-being of your people actually look like? And how do you know whether you're wasting your money on things that you really just don't actually need? So today's webinar, we're going to learn how to implement effective, holistic well-being that our employees actually want. So I'm really delighted to bring to the stage Laura Matthews. Laura is a senior wellbeing consultant at Barnett Waddingham. Barnett Waddingham are a partner of Inspiring Workplaces. Laura specialises in workplace wellbeing with all types of organisations, and not only is she just a wonderful, lovely human being, but I'm sure she's got some really interesting things to share with us today. So Laura, hi, there you are. Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, thank you so much, Ruth.
How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yeah,
where are you joining us from?
So I'm working from home today in sunny Leigh-on-Sea in Essex. So yeah,
which is like just like east of London for anyone that doesn't know their exact geography in the UK. Yeah.
Apologies. Yeah, so it's southeast from London. So my normal place of work would be our London office.
Amazing. And you're going to be telling us how to stop wasting our money, not just in general life, but on well-being and well-being solutions. And do you know what? This is a topic that's been really, really popular because people are just throwing money at things that they think are solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go through in a moment what we're going to explore, but I think coming out of this really challenging time where there has been so many wellbeing challenges for so many organisations, I think there has been potentially money being wasted. So yeah, we're just going to explore some of the tips and tricks that I can give you today.
Amazing. Right, Laura. Well, I'll hand the stage over to you. We'll bring up, I know you've got some visuals to share with everyone as well. So I'll bring them up. There they are on the screen. I'll hand the stage over to you and I'll be back with questions. If anyone's got any questions while they're watching live, then do pop them in below or above, depending on where you're watching it. Do pop them in and we'll share them with Laura. And if you've got any on demand, then again, put them in the comments section. But Laura, I'll see you shortly.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Ruth. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Laura Matthews. I'm a senior wellbeing consultant at Barnet Waddingham. And my role typically is to advise organisations on improving the happiness and well-being of their organisation. But all of the services that and the consultancy that I provide is very much driven through wellbeing analytics. So really understanding the needs of the workforce and ensuring that we are putting interventions that are not only cost effective, but also applicable to your individual workplace. So we're just moving on to what we're going to cover today. So we're going to touch on various elements around kind of why is wellbeing important in today's world, and I'm going to provide you with some statistics from a recent survey that we held earlier in the year. I'm going to talk about some of the trends within a wellbeing and employee benefits perspective that we are seeing, and then touch on why are organisations wasting money on wellbeing. Now, it's a very controversial kind of topic, especially because more often than not, organisations are will need to almost invest more money in this topic. So we're going to provide some kind of tips and tricks to identify if you as an organisation fall into this bracket. And then I'll provide you with some information and, as I say, tips and tricks to prove and then improve in what you're doing currently. So moving forward, so why is wellbeing important? Let me just set the scene for you. So in a survey that we published earlier on in the year, where we surveyed around 2,000 employed people from the UK PLC around wellbeing, how COVID has affected their wellbeing, but also their opinions on the support that they received throughout the pandemic from their employer. Now, overall, kind of the key themes that we did find was predominantly around this productivity gap. So something that really stuck out for me was that our survey suggested that on average, employees admitted that they are only productive for about 60% of their working day. So put differently, organisations are paying for, let's say, a 7.5-hour day, but are only yielding about 4.5 hours of work from individuals. Now, that's a pretty shocking statistic that we found. And I think some of you are probably thinking, well, this is because employees were working from home, there was distractions, etc. But there was no overall kind of material difference between the productivity of those working within their normal hours, so a normal place of work, versus from them working from home. However, when we kind of took a little bit of a deeper dive into the research, the findings did also account for lower levels of productivity. And this really showed kind of the disconnect between the employer and the employee. And as we've seen in a number of our previous market researches, where there is a complete disparity in the findings. So what our employees are feeling and finding versus to what our employers are almost projecting about their employees. So this can only not affect productivity, but this can impact morale, culture, and ultimately employee well-being. So let's just look at some of the statistics that our survey brought to the table. So when we believe that our employers don't care about us, our productivity drops by a further 6%. So obviously, when we're trying to balance our home life and our work life, it really does help to have an employer who's very understanding, empathetic, and supportive, and not necessarily somebody who raises an eyebrow when you need to kind of nip off to grab your child from school if they're not very well, or even possibly take an elderly parent or relative to a doctor's appointment, which is all very much of today's life. But think about this. What if your manager, for example, isn't sympathetic to your home life responsibilities, or even potentially that your boss is outright dismissive or even hostile towards your personal obligations? This can be particularly challenging, especially as we've just come out of a 20-month kind of pandemic lockdown, when many of us have had our work and our home lives very much kind of blended. We also asked within our survey, how are you currently coping at work? So we put that question to the 2,000 employed people, and we asked them to choose out of 4 categories: flourishing, achieving, coasting, and struggling. So out of these 4 categories, we found that 1 in 4 people are coasting, and we found that 10% of respondents are struggling. So combined, this is 35% of the respondents that chose these two answers as their answer, which works out a little bit more over than 1 in 3. Now, just take a second to consider that's 35% representative of your organisation. And what do you think that could be contributing to? So in quite a lot of our client-employee surveys, the coasting responses always throws up a very interesting conversation with our HRDs and reward managers when we present the results back. Because we believe at Barnet Woodingham there are 2 types of coasters. We have the conscious coasters and the non-conscious coasters. So let me explain this. So the conscious coasters are very much kind of integral to an organisation where you have them come in from a 9 to 5 or work or log on, should I say, from a 9 to 5. They get their job done. They're very much kind of very happy just sitting where they are in their career, not wanting to progress, but happy to do the day-to-day. Your non-conscious coasters, though, are people that you can make a real impact on, especially, for example, if they are somebody who is just logging on, completely disengaged, not having too many skills for let's say the job that they're doing. So then they're finding that there is a disconnect within the role that they're currently doing and that they could be doing. But also, this is where kind of presenteeism lies. So as we know from various CIPD surveys, presenteeism is almost double that of absenteeism. So if you do know the cost of absence within your organisation, double that, and let's then consider 1 in 4 or people within your organisation potentially falling in with that coasting category. Moving on. Almost 30% of respondents felt that their organisation does not provide the correct support around mental health. Now, in a pre-COVID world, mental health related absences was the most common cause of long-term sickness, and with stress-related absences within the workplace increasing more than ever. So work-related stress, depression, anxiety account for about 44% of the work-related ill health, as well as sickness absence. Poor mental health, as we all know, can lead to increased staff turnover, reduced engagement within the organisation, higher levels of presenteeism, which perfectly links back to the stat that I was previously talking about. But there's some research provided from the Oxford Economics Department, which stated that the cost of replacing a valued employee averages around £30,000 a year. So if, for example, you have got high levels of presenteeism, organisations are not providing the correct level of mental health support, you are going to be challenged with attraction and retention issues. And with staff turnover and the cost of replacing a valued employee around £30,000, this potentially is where we are starting to see we are wasting money on wellbeing. So the facts do suggest that the pandemic and all the measures taken from the government, such as lockdown and social distancing, has had a significant impact on the mental health of our employees. And it is very possible that the mental health implications will be felt for many months and even years going forward. And finally, a stat that really stuck out for me was that almost a third of respondents said that their organisation did not support their well-being throughout the pandemic. Now, without the additional stress of lockdown, of isolation, caring responsibilities, whether that be from children, elderly, parents or relatives, or even your neighbours, homeschooling, furlough, the illness itself, possibly even kind of a bereavement and death, and not forgetting the lack of toilet roll, there was also people stressing about their jobs, and this was because their employers didn't care or didn't support their well-being. Now, from experience and in my opinion, I felt that there was companies that fell largely into a number of brackets. There was a number of companies who obviously needed to make immediate cost savings. So they furloughed the majority of their staff. They cut wellbeing budgets immediately. Now, thinking about that, what impact does that have on an individual? Obviously, you're taking that employee's routine away completely. You are obviously routine and change is something that can be very difficult for people to take on board, etc. And there was quite often than not, organisations that didn't communicate with their staff from 1 month to the next, so kind of leaving people in the dark and not really knowing what's coming. And there was also other companies that that recognised that this position was not okay, and then quickly realised that this was not a viable option and that employees needed support. And this is where they started then potentially throwing money at various interventions to support support their employees. But then there was a number of organisations who really did take a step back and ask questions like surveys, etc. How are you feeling? Like what is keeping you awake at night, and what can the business be doing right now to support you? So just have a little think about those 3 brackets, and what kind of bracket did your organisation fall into? So with all of this in mind, what kind of trends are we seeing in relation to wellbeing and employee benefits? So obviously mental health has been already mentioned, and we know that mental health related absences was the most common cause of long-term sickness, with stress related absences particularly increasing. But with the impacts of the isolation, the additional responsibilities, in my opinion, I think employee wellbeing, especially around mental health, was vastly impacted. So, what are organisations doing around this area? It was only this morning that the BBC reported another spike in COVID cases yesterday, and with all the kind of the publication story around the 3rd wave and potentially top up of vaccines, this again can be causing quite a lot of worry and concern around employee wellbeing, and obviously the whole kind of return to work piece, which is the next kind of trend that we are looking at. So what does the return to work process look for a lot of organisations? I know that some organisations, especially in Barnet Waddingham, we've put together a really concise work smart plan where we are slowly integrating back into the office, but it is still very much on a holistic and agile working basis. It was only beginning of the week, one of my close friends was talking, and her organisation, who is a large law firm in the city, have asked that all the secretarial staff come back into the office as of Monday, 5 days a week. And already they've received 5 resignations out of a pool of 20 secretarial staff. So it is this real pressure on organisations. If you don't adapt and you don't change with the flexible working kind of policies, etc., are you going to be potentially losing your valued staff? And going back to the fact that it costs £30,000 to replace someone like this, what kind of costs are you heading towards? Continuing on the return to work kind of theme, how many of us got a pet in lockdown? I've got my little rescue cat just sitting here. So there's questions around this whole kind of separation anxiety. Who's going to let the dog out to go to the toilet, or who's going to look after the dog if we was to go back to the workplace? So I think it's a really valid point that has been raised actually at Barnet Waddingham. But what kind of impact will that have on employees wanting to come back to the workplace? And then finally, the last kind of trend that I really wanted to highlight to you today was this huge backlogs of work, hospital waiting times. And now they're longer than they've ever been. And I still believe that trying to get a doctor's appointment in this, like today, is still really, really hard, especially for a face-to-face. But potentially this is impacting the private medical insurance. So already from an employee benefits perspective, we've seen premiums increase as the insurers do understand that the employees will be seeking the treatment that they have much needed in the last 18 months. But from an employee benefits and risk perspective, with a lack of initial diagnosis and delayed treatment, ultimately this only means worse outcomes. So when we do start looking at your employee benefits, or even your risk, your group risk services and products that are offered, this could act as the ripple effect. So somebody is potentially off sick, their rehabilitation and kind of recovery period is going to be increased, which potentially could impact on something like sick pay insurance. You might then find that with a late diagnosis, that impacts on something like critical illness, and potentially something like worse outcomes could then impact on the longer term on something like group life policies. So moving forward, are you as an organisation wasting money on wellbeing? So in my experience, obviously working with organisations, really getting to understand their workforce and what they have in place, there's many instances where we've seen and actually experienced organisations wasting their money on wellbeing. Now, why is this, you'll ask? So the services, interventions and benefits just not meeting the needs of their workforce. So this simply could be where the organisation has made just assumptions on what they think their employees need and want. It could even be a lack of choice when it comes to interventions, services, even kind of support, etc. But it is really, really important that you do understand what your employees are needing, and not to like mirror maybe, let's say, a competitor's wellbeing strategy or benefits offering, because your organisation will be unique to you. Poorly communicated. So these services and benefits could be poorly communicated or even be your best kept secret. So I've known organisations who have had some really fantastic services and interventions, but they're not communicated throughout the workforce. So people don't really know about them. So invariably their engagement and management information is really, really poor. It could even be that the services that are offered are not fully understood. So something like a cash plan where invariably people don't know the extent of the claim back amounts, or like the services that they could claim back for. Again, potentially underutilized or misunderstood. Duplication of services. So a lot of group risk benefits, such as group income protection, which is also known as sick pay insurance, even some like group life and critical illness, have embedded employee assistance programs. Now, invariably, organisations may have had a standalone employee assistance program, which means that there is a duplication of services. Again, there's a cost saving that could be had there if you was to then cease the standalone service and utilise the benefits that are embedded that you currently have. Occupational health and rehabilitation is another one that you often see a duplication of services, whereby an organisation will, let's say, have a fixed retainer of an occupational health service to support the absence management of an individual. However, things like your sick pay policy, also known as group income protection, will have rehabilitation services embedded within it. So rewriting your absence management policy or processes can help save money from an occupational health perspective. So the hidden costs around well-being. So these are very much about the person who is driving these, let's say, poorly communicated benefits or poorly communicated interventions. And it's their time, their effort, the resource, kind of the research that goes behind it. So these are all like the hidden costs when you start considering who's creating your well-being strategy or even your well-being calendar. So how can you identify if you fall into this category? So moving forward. So how to collect data. So I think wellbeing analytics is absolutely integral to any wellbeing or benefit strategy. Obviously, surveys I would personally say are the best approach, because you can then ask a vast range of questions around all the various topics of wellbeing to really get a vast understanding of what's going on within your workplace. Now, 2 to 3 questions within an engagement survey is just not going to provide you with the meaningful data that you actually need in order to support your employees throughout this. I would also recommend that you consider various demographic cohorts. So do ask questions around what age category that you fall into, or even department, because then this will be able to enable you to give you kind of real deep down analysis, and you'll be able to then start to find your trends and hotspots as well. You can also widen your approach with various listening projects, maybe interviews, have kind of like round tables and ask your employees like what they're currently feeling, what is the feeling around the workforce, and this will give you a better kind of gauge on also the kind of the culture and the morale that is currently within your organisation. But don't forget to feedback. Once you've collected data, employees want to know what's also going on, so feedback is so important when it comes to things like this. So, benefit audits. This is a fantastic way of really reviewing what's kind of going on with what you're currently offering. So, really understand all the management information. Ask your providers what they currently offer, what can they offer, is there any additional services or products that they are able to offer at maybe, let's say, a reduced cost. We'll come on to that bit in a second. So identifying the gaps. So once you've done your your wellbeing analysis and also your benefit audit, this will allow you to really identify the gaps in your proposition. It might be that there is a certain cohort of individuals or even a location where their wellbeing scores are slightly lower. And again, that allows you to realise that that can be where you can focus your initial efforts in order to bring the scores up in that particular area. Set measurable objectives. So this is really, really important. You need to really include timeframes as well for change. And once you've identified your gaps, you're able to then obviously put interventions, support services, or maybe even information to the workforce. But give yourself goals. Make sure that they are set measurables and your objectives for change. And build your reasons why. So this is very much around your business case. This is where you're going to get your internal buy-in. This will also be where you'll get your kind of budget signed off as well. Include findings from your analysis in order to gain your buy-in. And this is very much your why around well-being. Why do you want to improve the well-being of your workforce? Because we can increase happiness, we can increase productivity, and we can increase like various scores within certain areas. And these will all be obviously working towards a more productive workforce, which will impact your bottom line. Do make sure that you include your kind of internal promoters within your business case. So these are potentially looking at setting up like wellbeing networks or even wellbeing champions across the business. These will be able to be like almost spread out around the workforce in order to promote those kind of internal messages. Obviously, going back to the poorly communicated point in my last slide, communication is absolutely key. So have a dedicated area, maybe on a wellbeing area on your internal communication site. It could be that there's a regular email trail or even kind of a notice board newsletter, what's going on in the next few months. So how can these benefits or solutions be delivered? So in order to improve engagement and allow for amendments, obviously providing a suggestion on what you are going to be providing within your strategy and asking employees for that feedback will constantly help you kind of improve the process or tweak what you currently have. So the solutions, benefits and interventions that you can then offer doesn't necessarily need to be really costly. There's a typical example. I was working with a client on a financial wellbeing proposition, and following a review of the market, we actually suggested that they undertake the financial wellbeing proposition of their pension provider. So not only was this a well-known name throughout the business, as obviously everybody had their pension with this particular provider, but it also ensure that they had a discount or discounted rates through their pension provider because they currently had their scheme with them. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a really costly exercise. And well-being doesn't also need to have a really complex journey. So it could be that you devise your own well-being calendar, which is spread out throughout the year, or a lot of the providers that are currently out there, health and wellbeing providers, do actually have a calendar that which you could then take into your organisation and amend throughout the year. So it's about ensuring that that message is constantly reminded throughout the organisation. It's not just a once and done kind of event once a year. So how can these benefits be delivered? So on screen, there's a couple of examples of kind of flexible benefits and digital offerings. And now, ideally, some of these benefits won't be applicable to everybody at one particular time, so they need to be accessible at any time. There are various ways of obviously ensuring that they are delivered at a lower cost. So things like salary sacrifice benefits or benefits that attract national insurance savings that can help you deliver something like a flexible benefits platform at like a neutral cost. So these are things that definitely could be exploring. But it's also worth taking into consideration that it's not just the upfront costs to consider. Like I mentioned earlier, these are things like time, resources, the administration, the various skills that you need in order to deliver these, whether that's from kind of a flexible benefits platform, or in a communications perspective. You need some time to take into consideration any kind of employee concerns that they may have. and have time and resource in order to answer those as well. So, to summarise, well-being is most definitely not a destination. It is a journey. It's always evolving. Obviously, the well-being challenges of an individual can change from week to week, maybe even month to month. And we see how kind of dramatic it changed from, let's say, January, February last year, and then we was all in lockdown. So people's kind of well-being challenges do change. So make sure that well-being within your organisation is most definitely a journey and not a destination. Obviously, use data analytics to inform your strategy, because then you'll be applying the correct interventions to the correct needs of your individuals within your workplace. Ensure that it is regularly reviewed. If you was to put a strategy in place, let's say 8 years ago, that wouldn't be applicable to today's concerns. So it is something that needs to be regularly reviewed. And then implement and communicate. Ask for feedback. And then again, you just start the journey again. So I think I'm due to hand back to Ruth now for any questions that have come in. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Laura. And there's Laura's contact details. If anyone's watching live, this blog will also be, this video, this recording will also be available on demand. So we'll include those in the post as well. But Laura, I'll remove them off the screen for now.
Thank you
so much. You shared such a wealth of information and advice and guidance that I'm sure people can apply, irrespective of where they are in the world and whatever they do in their business. So,
Absolutely.
wow, I mean, so much in there, and I'm sure everyone will completely agree. I thought what was really interesting is the last couple of years in particular, I think well-being has been a subject over the last 20 years, maybe forever, that's been on the rise, right? Like, we're starting to understand that if people are okay, then they deliver more. Or if people are happy, that's the right thing to do, not only for business, but just to look after each other and look after humans, right? So it's definitely been a subject, but quite rightly, as you highlighted, the pandemic has just highlighted that exponentially.
Absolutely.
But there seems to be a real disconnect for me. The last 2 years, well-being has been like, maybe well-being and inclusion have been like the biggest topics that people have been talking about. The pandemic has highlighted a need for better diversity, for more inclusive workplaces. The pandemic has highlighted the need that we are supporting people's well-being more. So there's been an awful lot of talk about it, but yet a third of people still feel unsupported. That's a really high number, and it feels like, to me, there's been an awful lot of talking, but not maybe there has been the action, just not the right action. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes back to really understanding what is going on in your organisation. It could be that, let's say, just by reviewing the management information of an employee assistance program, you can see that, let's say, there's been a spike in people reaching out for like debt consolidation. So does that spur you on as an employer to look at, let's say, your financial wellbeing strategy, or even start to consider financial wellbeing? Because naturally, even 5 years ago, you spoke about financial wellbeing and people were like, well, that's not my responsibility. I pay my employees. Why should that bother me? But actually, the mental health and financial wellbeing are so closely linked that if you are sitting at your desk constantly worrying about how am I going to pay my bills or how am I going to put food on the table, that's going to massively impact your productivity. And working for Barnett Woodingham, obviously we're a pension actuarial consultancy firm, so we're always encouraging people. We're encouraging our clients to encourage their employees to invest more into their pension so that they can save for that one day. But actually, from a wellbeing perspective, if those employees cannot save for the one day because they are struggling with the today, your messages and your efforts are going to be falling on deaf ears. So it's very much about understanding the needs of your workforce, what's actually going on, and then addressing the issues that the wellbeing, the analytics show up.
And potentially not even falling on deaf ears, but just adding more pressure.
Absolutely.
Like, you need to be thinking about your pensions. Well, I can't even think about next week.
Absolutely.
It's a really interesting subject, and I really like where you said don't mirror or copy what other businesses are doing. You can see some really sexy case studies out there of what businesses are doing and how they're making great strides in their well-being, and we're sharing them through our awards platform as well. But that's because that's what's right for their business and they're seeing the results. If you just try and copy what they do, like you said, it could just land completely wrong because you're not looking at what's going on inside for your people. So thank you so much. There's a couple of thank yous come in the comments here. Hopefully you can see them showing up. There's been a couple of questions as well. There was one question here from Joe, which I think may be something that you might want to follow up with and put a bit more detail when we put this on demand. But having the comparisons between productivity, coasting, and struggling.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we're office based.
Yeah, Joe, thank you for your question. And absolutely, I can most certainly dive into the data and provide that. And we have got kind of the national geographical splits for around this. And very much, as I mentioned within our client surveys, we not only ask them how they are coping at work, but we also ask them about their happiness currently. So how happy are you currently? And then we can look at the disconnect there. So is the workplace stealing that individual's happiness? And there's some really kind of softer stats as such to feed back to that organization, but it really gives them a feel of what's going on. It kind of gives you that morale, that kind of culture piece, which they can then feed into. So yeah, Joe, absolutely happy to come back either on an individual basis or on the blog piece that I'm planning to support Ruth on after we launch this video.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Joe, for that question as well. I really like that question around happiness because I'm like, love what I do, have a really good sense of purpose, work with an amazing team, feel really included. And I've had 3 hours sleep because I've got 1-year-old twins. So like the sleep deprivation is really impacting my well-being, which in turn will impact my productivity. It's not 100%. Work's problem. They can't give me more sleep. There probably is an element of where your organization can support you in that, in helping you. So that's a really interesting piece. There's a couple of questions come in here. So this one, the pandemic highlighted the support required for employed carers of family members of long-term conditions. And are you seeing increased support packages for carers?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only from kind of a flexibility and agile working perspective, but something Barnet Woodingham has done recently is for all of our platform clients, we have included a care concierge service, which allows for 24-hour access to elderly care support. So this is where, for example, people are seeing increased caring responsibilities. They are then having to deal with the challenges of, oh, mum's had a fall, she's gone into hospital, how do I get a hospital bed? Where do I even start with the care system in the UK? How am I going to finance this? And we've got care experts on hand 24 hours a day to support these individuals. And because we know and we value this service so much, we're offering it to all of our clients just as a bolt-on, actually, as of the middle of November. So I'm really excited to launch that with the care concierge service.
That was a very good, timely question, Kevin.
It very much was, yes. Thank you.
Kevin's followed that up with carers are found to be very effective employees and we cannot afford to lose them from the workforce. So no wonder you've got this package coming in just a few weeks. This is a good one. Another one from Kevin, actually. Do we believe that working from home will increase opportunities for people living with disabilities? Do you have any data or thoughts on that, Laura?
I don't have any data to hand. However, in my opinion, I believe that it will massively increase the opportunities for people who are living with disabilities. I think it's a very interesting point that you raise, and I think it's probably something that we should do some research on as well. It would also be good to get some kind of some like live case studies or like lived in experience of people who, let's say, have who do suffer with disabilities and how they've found the working from home. I'm part of our Wellness Plus Network D&I steering group at Barnet Woodingham, of which the group that I currently sit in, there are a few people who do have, I say disabilities, but actually we call them superpowers, because technically these people do have something that the normal person doesn't, and those should be promoted and not considered a negative. And some of those people have actually suffered from the like picked up on the isolation piece, that has actually been a detriment to their well-being. So they've been really excited to get back to the workplace on a full-time basis. So I guess I think it really depends on the disability. And I think employers need to almost manage those cases individually, because I think everybody is different, even if it is the same, let's say, autism or dyslexia, even if it is the same kind of disability. But yeah, that's my kind of thoughts.
Yeah, and the pandemic and working from home better increase opportunities, because if that pandemic and people being forced to work differently hasn't proven that productivity in that respect, then I really don't know what will. There's an amazing organization called Purple who are working really hard. They're based near you in Essex, actually, who are working really hard to demonstrate the spending power and also the talent power of people that live with disabilities. And the number of people out of work who have disabilities is disproportionately way too big, and there's a lot of work to be done on that. So thank you for that, Kevin. And a final question for you, Laura. Before we close, understanding that many senior managers are demotivated, are there specialist coaching services available to support senior management? Would you agree with that? Have you got any thoughts on why that might be?
To answer the question, yes, there are specialist coaches that can support senior management in kind of supporting well-being, supporting kind of increasing, obviously, motivation, etc. I think senior management have a lot of additional pressures than the usual kind of working employee. I think they obviously have targets and they have to report to various management boards, etc. But when it comes to well-being, you do often see that there is a disconnect with the senior management or the board in relation to that strategy, because invariably the strategy is driven very much from the HR department, maybe from a HR BP who very much understands well-being and is very much invested in looking after the people. But even people like the finance director, who ultimately hold the purse strings, they want to know, if we're going to give you, let's say, £10,000, what's that return on investment going to be? So it is very much about ensuring that your business case is very well rounded, that you do have your return on investment pieces in there. So this is what it's going to cost. This is what we project the return on investment to be. And there is more and more evidence that every pound that you spend on wellbeing, I think it, off the top of my head, so don't hold me to this, does return about £4 in return on investment. And you can very much start to pick up on some of the wellbeing analytics of, okay, so this is what absence is costing us. From a data perspective, this is what presenteeism is. If we can put a cost on absence, we can double it for presenteeism. What interventions are we going to put in place, and how is that going to improve the bottom line? So you can then start to kind of almost work that story back and say, well, this is what our organisation is going to look like. So I think it's very much around, and from experience, when I've presented those sort of findings to organisations, people really do sit up and go, wow, that's actually quite a vast saving. So that's definitely, from my perspective, the best hook. What can we save the organisation, or how much could we make the organisation in improved productivity? Just even simply like looking at those non-conscious coasters and turning them into an achieving or even a flourisher. So yeah, that's my perspective.
Wow. And hook them with the money, hook them with the finance, hook them with the bottom line, but also hook them at the heartstrings. It's the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
People, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, Laura, thank you so much. I could carry on talking to you about wellbeing all afternoon. I've got 2 children downstairs who really need dinner. So
no
talk about being pulled in different directions. But
absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing so much and really giving us all a bit of a kick up the bum on to stop wasting money and do the right thing, and how to do it as well. It's been really, really helpful. I know we've had lots of thank yous coming in from anyone that from the people who are listening and watching live. If anyone's listening and watching on demand, then do feel free to add comments below. Laura will follow this up with a bit more content in the blog as well. But from all of us at Team IW and from all of the team at Barnet Waddingham, thank you so much for today, Laura.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Bye for now.
All right, take care, everyone.